I want to talk about the DeMeco Ryans mindset heading into the draft because I think it's relevant. We've talked about this a couple of times, but perhaps we missed something that matters most when it comes to the most important draft, arguably, in Texans history. The fact that DeMeco Ryans has been in this situation before. Let's go back to San Francisco in 2017. 49ers were coming off 2 one-and-done coaches. They were coming off the falling out of a coach who had a good run of success in Jim Harbaugh. They had someone overseeing their organization who inherited the power, and many people were questioning him. They were questioning the organization's culture, etc., in Jed York. And then they hired the most sought-after name in that coaching cycle in Kyle Shanahan, and he was brought in to fix things. Along with Kyle Shanahan was a quality control coach by the name of DeMeco Ryans. DeMeco Ryans has said that he followed Kyle Shanahan around. He talks about Kyle Shanahan as if he's one of his main coaching influences, his coaching mentor, almost his coaching father. And DeMeco Ryans was there in 2017. Let's look at the 2023 Houston Texans. Just like San Francisco, 2 one-and-done coaches. Cal McNair getting the same type of criticism that Jed York received. Falling out with Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby, much like with Jim Harbaugh. And they got the most sought-after name on the market, and they brought in DeMeco Ryans to fix things. Those similarities speak for themselves, but there's even more to it. Because if you look at what San Francisco had on their roster, they did not have a quarterback. And the San Francisco 49ers had not one, but 2 first-round picks. Their first-round pick was number 2 overall, just like the Houston Texans. The San Francisco 49ers had the number 2 overall pick. Now, San Francisco passed on Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes, which Kyle Shanahan has said, obviously, if you could go back, you would love to have drafted Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson, but let's be honest, those guys went outside of the top 10. So it's not like San Francisco is alone in that. What San Francisco did, though, is really interesting, and I think the philosophy and the fact that DeMeco Ryans was there to hear this philosophy preached by Kyle Shanahan is what makes things even crazier heading into the draft 15 days from now. Before we get into that, let's hear Kyle Shanahan talking about April 27th of 2017 when the 49ers decided to trade back one spot to 3 and then go D-line. Solomon Thomas didn't work out either, but they decided to go with what they felt was the best defensive line. And let's hear Kyle Shanahan talking about the philosophy that led to him making that decision.
I didn't look into him, obviously, as much as I should have. Definitely looked into him, studied all his tape. A freak. Could make any throw, had the ability to do anything. I thought it was a little bit different situation for us. We had the 2nd pick in the draft. Did not feel like, from all the intel you get and stuff, that he was going to go that high. And it was a little different situation for us just because I think it's pretty well documented of just the relationship I had with Kirk and being in Washington and everything. And I felt very confident that he wasn't going to stay there. So anytime you go into a season knowing that a franchise quarterback's going to be available the next year, it made me a lot more picky with what we were looking at. So there is always a risk with that when you spend a first-round pick on a quarterback. And with the situation we were in, didn't want to be that risky, especially with the 2nd pick in the draft. So we didn't do that as hard. Obviously, he ended up being one of the best players in the league.
All right. Now, that's interesting because what he just said was that they waited for Kirk Cousins the next year. So Kyle Shanahan came in, borderline identical situation as the one DeMeco Ryans is in, and he thought that there was an opportunity to get a better quarterback option a year later. Now, he was wrong about that. He was wrong about that, as many were, but he looked a year down the line to get a quarterback. So when we talk about the draft class next year and we talk about the Texans having 2 first-round picks, DeMeco Ryans, who sat in all these meetings with Kyle Shanahan, they discussed this philosophy. He witnessed Kyle Shanahan talking about this philosophy. DeMeco Ryans witnessed a coach who said, we don't have to get a quarterback now. We can wait till next year. He was willing to do that. They traded back from 2 to 3, made the wrong pick there as well. Here's another quote from Kyle Shanahan in an article in The Athletic talking about why he decided to go defense instead of quarterback. Quote, "When we came here, my goal was to hopefully build a D-line. I thought the D-line is kind of what gets you to the Super Bowl, but you've got to have the quarterback to do it. So which is going to come first? You have guys that weren't being classified as top 10 picks yet because no one thought they were exactly a slam dunk yet. And so do you want to make the risk now, or do you know that you might have something next year at the quarterback position? So why don't you just look at other positions, try to build the team, because our team isn't totally ready exactly for a quarterback right now." Close quote. That's Kyle Shanahan. Now, the question is, because a lot of times your mentors, your fathers, they have philosophies. Sometimes you learn from those philosophies and you say, well, they made mistakes, so I don't want to repeat the mistakes they made. Sometimes you follow those philosophies. Like, does DeMeco Ryans look at this and say, man, we passed on Mahomes and Watson. Maybe I'm going to be more aggressive and try to find a quarterback? Or does he focus on the philosophy that Kyle Shanahan had and say, okay, there might not be a hurry because the guy that I like most is going to go number one. Maybe I'm going to follow the philosophy that Kyle Shanahan made. It's really a matter of, does DeMeco Ryans focus on the philosophy? Does the mistake cause him to be a bit more aggressive? But he's been in this situation before. It's identical pretty much.
It's almost identical, but let me take it a step further even for you here, because Kyle Shanahan obviously was such an influence on DeMeco Ryans. Who had some of the biggest influence on Kyle Shanahan? That would be Gary Kubiak. 2006 was Gary Kubiak's first season as Texans head coach. Vince Young was on the board. Matt Leinart was on the board. Jay Cutler was on the board. What did they draft?
Mario Williams.
Defensive end. And so these are all philosophies that come from the same tree. So you can talk about, the influence of Kyle Shanahan. By the way, the second pick was DeMeco Ryans, another defensive player that Kubiak had in 2006. So you talk about the tree and the philosophy. It goes back at least 2 generations, and so when you think about DeMeco and do we have to have a quarterback right now? Well, that's not the quarterback we want. It's very, very, very believable that he could follow the same thing.
The missing on the draft it speaks for itself. But I think the philosophy is what I would think matters the most. Because first of all, everybody missed on Mahomes and Watson for the most part, right?
Sure. But to his point, they were kind of like borderline top 10 considered going into the draft.
And CJ, they might like CJ more. Maybe DeMeco thinks it's a little bit, more urgent. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe he doesn't. The philosophy is just, it's very clear what it was. It's just a matter of how DeMeco Ryans looks at this. Does he look next year at potentially getting a quarterback like Shanahan did? There was also an adjustment because they ended up trading for Garoppolo that year. So there was also a little bit of an adjustment by Shanahan there. But, Solomon Thomas didn't end up being what they'd hoped. But they did. The one thing they did do that I think the Texans will do if they decide not to take a quarterback is trade back one spot, because that's what San Francisco did with the Bears. They got a 3rd-round pick to move from 2 to 3. So if a team trades to 3 and they know the Texans are open for business and they like C.J. Stroud and they don't want to risk it, then maybe that happens. But I just think that this is a crazy identical scenario. But as much as you kind of see the light, it leads to more questions. It's really just a matter of what you do with that philosophy that you learn when you're DeMeco Ryans. Because the other thing is this, when you first start something, when you're in that moment and there's all that pressure, you're hanging on every word. Because DeMeco Ryans started his coaching career. He went to San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan. He's sitting in all these meetings. I'm sure this philosophy and the not rushing to get a quarterback and, thinking a year ahead, I'm sure it's something that Bobby Slowick heard it too, but I'm sure it's something that and look, not everyone can survive making a mistake like this, like Kyle Shanahan. Not everyone can coach like Kyle Shanahan. So there's that too. But when you go into your first journalism class and you go into your first work meeting and you're learning the ropes and you're learning about making important decisions and you're learning about, what this coach does or what they want to do, you're all ears. I mean, I still use some of the quotes from my first journalism class today. Follow the money, skepticism, like all that. Shout out to Robert Wernsman, rest in peace. Mr. Dean, Mr. Bruton. Like, I remember, like, all that. Well, like, when you're first going in there, this is DeMeco Ryans starting his coaching career, and it's identical. What you take from it, maybe you try to act differently. Maybe you have adopted that type of philosophy, but it has to be something that sticks with DeMeco Ryans. This is not, I'll say this is not foreign territory to DeMeco Ryans.
No, we are all.
He's not following Casario's lead. As a matter of fact, you can make a case that DeMeco has more of a education in this situation than Nick Caserio.
For sure. We are all molded by, mentors, people we admired or idolized, and certainly guys, people that have influenced and had success. And so, Landry, this is very, very reasonable for him to think back. It wasn't that long ago, and realize it worked. It didn't work the way they had planned initially, but it worked. Going that route instead of the conventional one with all these other quarterbacks.
713-572-4610 if you want to get in. 361 says Stroud is going to be a Texan. Okay, we will see. That's really, if DeMeco has questions about Stroud, I don't think he's taking him.
I don't either. You know where I've landed there now, and then the other part about this with DeMeco in San Francisco, he was there 6 years, and I think they only drafted one quarterback higher than like in the 60s, in the early third round. So he's had a lot of success there going this route, and it wasn't Trey Lance. It wasn't like Trey Lance was a franchise quarterback either. So he understands that these other things that you can do are just as important, especially if you have that long rope, which he has.